On this occasion, we're gonna see how to create a podcast on Mumbler. Let's go to our Mumbler account, and from the dashboard, we have the option here to create our first product. We click on it, and we're going to have three options to choose from. The first one is to create a podcast. The second one is to create an audio series. And the third one is to import a podcast. Let's start with this third one briefly, which has to do with whether we have a podcast published on another platform and we want to import it to Mumbler. That is, we want Mumbler to be our hosting platform and from today onwards. Every time we upload a podcast to Mumbler, it spreads to the rest of the platforms such as Spotify, iBooks, Apple Podcasts. We're going to leave this third option for the next video. And now we're going to focus on these two, which are publishing a podcast or publishing an audio series. What's the difference between a podcast and an audio series? The difference is that a podcast has a regular recurring publication. You can publish daily, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, or occasionally, but it's a podcast that will have some continuity over time. Unlike a podcast, an audio series is a type of publication that consists of a limited number of episodes. It can be an audio course, it can be a sound fiction, it can be a documentary podcast, or it can be any other type of content that you already have a prearranged duration for episodes, which can be 10 episodes to tell a story, to explain something, to provide training, or for any other purpose you may have. And there, once all 10 episodes are published, it is over and they are not published again in that same feed, unlike a podcast that continues to be published recurrently on a regular basis. Anyway, both podcast and audio series, the way of creating the content is exactly the same. All you have to do here is select the podcast option if you're going to continue uploading episodes on a regular basis, or the audio series option if it's going to have a limited series of episodes. So let's check it out with a podcast, but I insist, it's exactly the same if you want to publish an audio series. In the first option, we select the name of the podcast. In the second one, we put a description of the podcast. Next, we're gonna pick the cover of the main podcast. Here, for example, we select this one, but it should be a regular podcast cover. The category, what category does our podcast fall into? The language in which our content will be generated, the monthly price, if the podcast will be a free podcast, free like any other podcast, we leave it at 0. Otherwise, we have to establish the price of our content here and hear a welcome message for new subscribers who sign up here on this platform on Mumbler. The custom URL, we can leave this as it is. We choose the color of the button on our podcast page, the color with which we desire the text to be written, and here we have the option to include our website, our social networks, and so on. Then here we have one final option, which is whether we want to notify the individuals who sign up for our podcast on Mumbler, if we want to notify them via email every time we create a new episode, every time we publish a new episode. We can check this box if we do not want to notify them via email or leave it unchecked to notify them accordingly based on their preferences. We offer the option to save the podcast. It's created. Let's upload the first episode. So we offer the option to close, and here we have a new phase, which is to publish our first episode. Remember that we had a creator page when we entered there. Now we see our profile, we see the form, and now our podcasts and audio series appear here. This is already here that did not appear before. Before the donations appeared, but our first product did not appear, we click on it. At this moment, we have the page of our inaugural podcast published, but we haven't found any episodes because we haven't created any yet. So let's get started on it. What are your thoughts on this? We created the first episode, and here we have to upload the audio. We select the audio, and there it is loading. This is just some random audio that I had saved on my computer. We select the type of episode, which can be the episode trailer, it can be the private podcast, exclusive for paying subscribers, but we don't enable the payment section. So this is going to be a public podcast, and we describe the episode. We upload the cover of the episode if it's necessary. If we're going to change it, we're going to create a cover for each episode. We have to upload it, otherwise it will always show the podcast cover, the one we have selected. Here's the episode URL, the publication date. If we want to publish it immediately, we don't need to touch anything. If we want to schedule it, we can set the date and time for when we want to publish this podcast. And here's the email message that I mentioned earlier, which we believe our subscribers will receive if we choose to send it, if we have that option enabled. Anyway, if we don't want to write the message, we can check it here that in this episode, one don't want to send the podcast. But if we uncheck the option, check the option of not sending the podcast before, we don't need to do anything. Just click publish and we publish it. The episode has been released. Now we are going to discover that we have the initial episode published, and if we click on it, we will enter the URL of the episode, and now we can press play and begin playing it. So if we go back to the dashboard, we have already completed all the initial steps of Mumbler, and we can now dedicate ourselves 100% to creating and promoting our content.